All right, guys, topic number 2 on basically our series, if you're new to this series, is going to be about what to do when things go wrong. The 4 videos that we are approaching today is all about contest prep. We want to take a deep dive into what to do when your weight loss or your rate of loss is going too fast. We as a coaching staff kind of want to dive into our thought processes on it, what we're looking at, what we're assessing, how this can help you. And I want to give just a really practical example of what I typically do. I talked about this a little bit on the last episode discussing plateaus, but essentially it depends on where you're at within a contest prep when it comes to your rate of loss and how fast you're going. I also really like to look at biofeedback markers outside of just the scale, and that's how I really determine things. For example, to start a prep, if weight loss is going fast, initially, I'm okay with that. One of the kind of the program responses that I have with people, especially the first 2 weeks of a prep, is I'm okay with this rate of loss for now. I just don't want it to continue. Because for one, you might have individuals, we all can't expect the same out of every single athlete. I have some athletes that nail and adhere things to a T all off season long in terms of their sleep structure, in terms of the water consumption, in terms of not eating any Coke, drinking any Coke Zeros, not eating anything off plan. I have other people, that wasn't a direct, that wasn't at you. I have other people that pretty much nail the plan, but like, for example, even myself, like I'm going to enjoy Chipotle in the off season. I'm going to enjoy the Coke Zeros in the off season. Those things are going to be immediately cut out during a prep for me, like day one. So it's just assessing those variables. So when you're seeing weight loss happen fast, you have to know, is that actually fat loss or is that just weight coming off the body in terms of glycogen, in terms of fluid, things like that. Now, where this discussion really goes into the next more important category is when you are kind of in the nitty gritty of a prep where performance starts to drop off, and then you see this kind of, fat loss being expedited as well. And it's always, you have to compare and contrast between, you have to look at the individual and see how close they are to stage condition. And then you also have to really consider about the impact that the weight of their rate of loss is taking away from their performance. I have an athlete right now whose rate of loss is extremely fast, to the point where I'm having him check in every day, because we're in a situation where he's not in prep shape. Sometimes he's not even, giving me the look of hardness that I would expect to get off of his rate of loss, but yet his fat loss is still is going fast. So I keep feeding him up and doing things. Also, another thing that I consider too is, I think as people in prep, we always want the reward of food, but more often than not, I think the right call to make first is actually to pull back on the energy expenditure via cardio and via training. Because we can kind of basically put ourselves in an environment where we're out training our ability to consume food at the same rate. And that's going to make it where you're still losing fat, losing performance, and you're not going to be able to keep up with that. Because ultimately, the goal of this video and the goal of not increasing fat loss too quickly for me needs to come down to the fact that you really should not be losing any performance until, I would say, 6 to 3 weeks out. And that's really when leverages start to shift. And then the focus needs to shift from performance to purely cosmetic of what's going to reflect the best result on stage. But up to that 6 to 3, I say 6 to 3 because I think for some individuals it happens at 6. Some individuals, due to compounds being used, it might be at 3. I think we all experience this at some point. But again, when it comes to the rate of loss happening too fast, I would look at basically 3 things. I would look at your intake, I would look at your energy expenditure, and I would look at your training days a week and your training volume within those days. And don't always just reward or push the food up first. Looking long-term at your ability to basically sustain performance, really consider the output, energy output via cardio, and then just your steps through the day, if you can pull them back. And then also the training days a week, and then the volume within those training days.
Well,
I think that was a solo Jansen.
that pretty much sums that up. Basically the fatter someone is, the less you got to worry about it at the beginning of a prep, off the bat. To sum that up, the leaner someone is, and the more gifted someone is, this is where kind of, I don't want to say Body types don't matter. They kind of don't, but they kind of do. Like, like when you see someone that's got that like round muscle and they're pretty lean. Yeah, off the bat, if they're, if they lose 12 pounds in the first week, yeah, that's alarming to me. So it's definitely a case-by-case basis. But for the most part, yeah, I call it trimming the butter. So you're in that phase where you're just trimming off just bullshit weight.
Right.
And as long as that's coming off, I'm not really care what the numbers are. Like, I'm not like, oh, it's got to be 2 pounds a week every week. It doesn't work like that in the real world.
Sure.
It might be 7 the first week, 5 the next week, whatever it is. As long as performance isn't going down, like you said, while we're in the trimming the butter phase, I don't care what the number is.
Just let it run. Yeah.
Just let it run, yeah. And like you said, you just got to be patient with it. Like, I don't typically make changes to someone's diet initially unless for some weird reason I was way off and calculating. I typically don't change anything for a while, like 6 weeks maybe.
Not to cut you off, but something
it's fine.
That's really important too. For example, I want to give as many real life examples of like what's going on within our circle as well, so you guys can learn from real stuff. Matt came into the office this morning and said he was 265, so that's like down 8 pounds from Friday.
Friday, yeah.
And he had a cheat meal on Sunday, so that's a really fast rate of loss. But yet, cosmetically, the look is improving and not shifting for the worse. So immediately, I didn't even need to look at him because I don't think that at 18 weeks out, I need to look at an individual all that often. But I knew that I wanted to feed him. And the reason why, for no other reason, is metabolically, I know that through the calories that we pushed through Matt's off season, it was really beneficial. And one of the biggest concerns, or one of the biggest things that's always on my mind during a prep, is just allowing your metabolism to adapt to the food intake. So it's a great thing that the rate of loss is happening. It's a great thing that this easy fat is coming off. But at the same time, I want to keep his metabolism at the start of where it was in prep and not continue to downregulate to where his current weight is. And I'm not saying that there's a metabolic weight correlation, but what I'm saying is, if right now, while the fat is coming off so easy, if I weren't feeding him back up, sooner or later, his metabolism is going to adapt to the new food intake. But if we can keep feeding him up while the fat loss is occurring, metabolic function is going to stay higher in relation to his lower food intake in the moment. So that's why we're choosing with him specifically, because I know he operates very well off of them. I just told him to go eat again today after he trained because of the fact that we're trying to keep metabolic function high.
Mm-hmm. And I think that too, like, how do you choose between increasing my food overall or adding a cheat meal? You just answered that question because you know what I've been doing
right
the rest of the year.
Right.
Had you not known that, you're kind of like, I don't want to say guessing, but kind of.
Sure. Or not only guessing, but I'm erring more on the side of caution, which versus with you, I know what you can handle.
Yeah.
So like, I don't have to err on the side of caution, but well, let's add 400 grams of rice today.
Right.
When in reality, he can have
like
2,000 calories today and be totally fine.
You know that wouldn't make a dent.
Right.
I'd probably wake up lighter tomorrow.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I agree with what you guys mentioned. The main thing I notice in females, more so given that I work with a lot of ladies, off the bat, when we start dieting, when we start prep, there's not, like you mentioned, not a whole lot of changes being made. Maybe just introducing, for someone who's doing minimal cardio, I want to still try and keep their food as high as I can, but introducing some more cardio, allowing more consistency within the specific plan. So as you mentioned, like those of us who used to drink a diet soda every single night, or would maybe substitute meals here and there in our off season and have something out versus something that we cooked at home. Just, I'd notice the inflammation, the water retention. Even I had a girl check in with me the other day who's, we didn't really change anything from her prep to her off season or vice versa. It just smoothed itself out to where she's more dialed in on having that flipped switched.
Yeah.
And even in her face, I see a difference in the inflammation. That's something that I noticed happened to me last year, is once, cardio was consistent and in place and I wasn't having meals out and I was drinking more water for my fluids, The physical appearance is going to look a lot different. And if you were just simply going off a scale reading, I don't notice the weight change a whole lot off the bat for myself or for some of the girls I work with. It's more so their physical look. They look less puffy and less swollen. It's very cosmetic in the beginning from what I've noticed. And I've never had the experience with anyone that I've worked with so far where, I make a small adjustment and they're just dropping. Granted, we're smaller bodies. We're not training to the capacity that you guys are. But
and also too, for girls, I think you girls that are listening to this need to realize the percentage is different. So like when Matt loses 5 pounds off of 280 pounds, that percentage is a lot different than when Nadia loses 5 pounds off of 140 pounds. So like your rate of loss, you shouldn't even expect the same.
Yeah.
Because that's too large of a percentage of your total body weight that you're losing. So your rate of loss weekly should be less, which again comes down to giving yourself time. And now I'm kind of, this video is about rate of loss being great, but it still is very, very applicable to the discussion.
Well, to peel it back just a little bit into what we were talking about originally with this, is something else that's a good variable that I always ask everybody is not just what their training performance is like when we have a really high weight of loss, but to look at it as what do you feel like between the sets in your performance. When you're training, it's not about how much weight you can still lift a lot of the time, especially in the earlier stages.
Especially if you're Nick Gloff.
Especially if they're me or anybody that has like the kind of training ability that I have cultivated in myself.
Or mental approach.
Or anybody else that has any sort of a similar approach to me. Where for me, last time that I went through the prep is I felt terrible. Like standing up from sitting down on a bench between sets felt like a top set effort on the top set I was about to do. But then I could get under the bar or get in front of the bar and lift better than I would have expected and better than I did the last session. All the way through prep, and you can vouch.
Right.
I was getting stronger the whole time. And we were doing a lot of activity, a lot of cardio, and low calories, pretty much right from the beginning. So we had to do what we had to do, not because my rate of loss was too fast, but always looking at it to make sure that energy balance overall, you're looking at it from all the angles that could be looked at and not just what somebody could just push themselves through. Somebody's training performance could still stay high while they feel like absolute garbage.
Sure.
So that's always something to keep in mind too.
I think something too, just I notice this a lot on my Q&As, but there's just a general lack of understanding about the energy balance equation. Some people always associate energy balance with what you're taking in food. Some people always associate it to just simply cardio output when it's not just cardio output. Understanding how many calories it takes for you as an individual to function throughout the day needs to be considered without doing any excessive cardio or extra cardio. Also, what you're doing in terms of your job and work requirements. Like I work with some individuals that have to walk 20,000 steps a day. But also within that, you have to understand what that output is and then what the energy needs to be putting into that environment to still drive progress. So I think just a mental note here, I think it would be really good for us to do a whole video series on what energy intake, output, the equation, what that all really boils down to, because a lot of what we do on a daily basis comes down to energy, reserve, output, demand. It centers around all of that. So the more you understand that, the more applicable and easy it is to understand what really a contest prep is all about, because it's all about managing that.
And the closer you get to the show, throw it out the window.
Right.
Those rules kind of just don't apply.
Yeah.
There's things that you see and things that you have to do that don't make sense on paper.
Sure.
So, yeah.